Welcome back. Watching Privacy, episode 11, season 2. We got Raju back with us. So the original crew is here, and Brent, of course.
Can I
Let's.
apologize right at the top here? I'm
Uh,
I'm mismatching my mix matching my Rams logo, so I got the kind of the old school one here, but on my hat I have this. So just
uh,
want to apologize, especially to you, Tages, for
oh, yeah, I'm sure the audience will really appreciate that clarification. Uh, let's see. A lot to talk about this week. I think we'll dive a little bit deeper into maybe some legal stuff kind of popping up around the world. But let's start here. There's a story that came up. I think maybe last week we didn't get a chance to cover it, but Tim Cook had this little presentation thing at the Time 100 Summit, and basically it was talking about privacy and things like that. And we'll talk a little bit more about Apple and their privacy um, standings. But I thought it was kind of interesting what Tim was saying. Basically, he says that people will become restrained and begin thinking and behaving differently as they lose their sense of privacy in a world where digital devices and technology become more and more adept to tracking their movements. And so basically, if we begin to feel like we're being surveilled all the time, our behavior changes. We begin to do less. We begin to think about things less. We begin to modify how we think. In a world like that, where we're restraining ourselves, it changes society in a major way. I thought it was, a pretty good thing to say in general. I think subconsciously it might be happening. Did you guys think anything more of it, or am I the only one that kind of thought this was a good observation?
I mean, it's a good observation. Is just saying it loud, and that the extending that behavior and long term implications. I totally agree with him. It's like, let's say you're just casually browsing online, and you would be doing it freely, right? But let's say you're casually browsing online when somebody is watching you behind over the shoulder. Won't your behavior change, right? You're more conscious about it. So which means the things that you would do normally you may not do, knowing that somebody is always watching you on your shoulder. And that's what is highlighting. And I would actually extend it and say losing the privacy online is also will also eventually lead to losing your freedom, because just like you won't freely do the things that you would be doing, when you have not one, 50 people watching you always all the time. So that will eventually lead to freedom, and I think that's what is alluding to. Maybe he's not saying it, but that's a critical thing. So privacy, while it may be seen as one of those points, but I think there are strong implications down the lane once you play it out a few years.
I'm going to pick a nit with Tim Cook, or as a former president used to call him, Tim Apple, which I kind of like. Um, I feel like this. I feel the net is a positive statement and a positive thought, or at least a real thought. And coming from the CEO of Apple, it has a lot more heft to it. But let's face it. I mean, I think this has been going on already, and it's not that there's a loss of privacy. There was never really any privacy to lose, and now we're just starting to kind of focus on this area and to start giving real privacy where it was never there before. And so I think over the last 18 months or so, there has been more people already changing their behavior because we started learning more about the lack of privacy that we've always been dealt with. And as we learn more about it, we become more conscious about it, and we've already started to change our behaviors, finding out all these horror stories. I know I'm not doing things the same way as I was before we started the show, because of all of this information and all of these stories that we've been talking about. And because of that, and those things were some of these things date back that they've been doing it for 10 years. And so there was really never privacy that we had initially to lose. I think what's happening is, more as we hear more of these stories, we're realizing, oh my God, we've had nothing. Our data is all over the place. Now I'm already starting to do things differently and to look at apps differently, and I'm reading policies more. that wasn't really going on. And I do give Apple a lot of credit, because I think that the point of the line of delineation, if I could speak, is that when they did the 14.5 update, it really feels like from that point on, more and more of us are understanding the current state and where we would like to go with our privacy. So I like that he's talking about it more and more. But let's face it, we really didn't have privacy before.
Yeah, I think that one of the most simple examples is, I know a lot of people, even myself, sometimes I'll do it. You have like your primary browser you use, and you want to search for something that's like kind of dumb. Maybe like someone, you want to look up some stupid fact, or like figure out the spelling of something, or looking at some score or something. You know, some people just like by default pop up in an incognito browser and search in there rather than their primary browser, right? And it's like, it's subconscious, but you know it. Like some searches, you're just cool doing it normally, and some you're like, all right, I know this is kind of dumb. Let me like look it up somewhere else, and you think you're like saving yourself. So I feel like people know it and even tweak their behavior accordingly, but it's not like it's never really said out loud about how many people just act that way out of like habit at this point, right? Even though incognito
totally
is not
agree.
doing anything for you, but yeah.
Yeah, totally agree. The fact that people are, bringing up the incognito mode, and that mode is pretty popular, tells you that people are already changing the behavior. I mean, take my own case. I know that all these companies are trying to build a shadow profile of me as an individual, but then I also create another profile, and with a different name and an email address and whatnot. So whenever I visit a site and I don't have trust on, I basically use that name and that and all of that, and with a completely different profile that that is completely different from what I am as an individual. And even there I try to confuse, but this is, I shouldn't be doing it, but this is the reality. I have an email address nobody can recognize, and sometimes I even forget. But that is that is the reality, because they are in the business of building shadow profiles, and we are trying to create multiple profiles. If I can make one good case for metaverse, this is it. Creating shadow profiles for individuals, so that they can cheat some of the other companies who are building shadow profiles of individuals, because that shadow business is a shady business. So we have to try to figure out a way to get out of it.
Did you just freeze?
Brent, do we still have you? Roger, you cut out a little bit there.
Yeah, I'm still here.
But I think Brent is frozen. Or am I frozen?
Yeah, I'm here.
I don't know. Everybody seems a little wonky. All right, there you go. Now I think we're back in full speed now. But yeah, the metaverse is a good example of like being able to create those kind of pseudonymous profiles, which could be a step in the right direction, I guess. But I guess we'll see how it kind of plays out, because then ultimately just one of those identities is going to get tracked. And then eventually, even in Roger's case, you got multiple profiles out there and email addresses, but it's all linked back to maybe the same browser, the same IP address with the same computer specs. And they kind of, it doesn't take like a genius to realize that if there's like an 80% overlap in the device you're using with some other thing, then it's probably very similar. So we'll count it as like another household user, or maybe you just gave it away, and now they'll find a way to just link profiles together and be like, this guy's cheating the system. Let's just merge it.
Yeah, I mean, that very much is the case. For example, in my case, I have about 4 or 5 browsers installed on every of my computer, and depending on which site I visit, I use the appropriate browser, and that is, again, that will change my behavior. I never logged into my Google account on my computer, at least in the last 5 years. Never. And that's me, because I simply don't trust Google. I deliberately forgot. The last time I logged in was probably 10 years back. I think when Brent, I think you came to Pleasant and we had a discussion. You posted on Facebook, and I think I logged in to like it, and that's the last time I used Facebook.
That's funny. Oh man. So your behavior changed way before Tim said anything, basically.
Yeah.
But I mean, also on this Apple argument, I guess, so even with the recent announcement from the WWDC last year, they announced this buy now, pay later scheme, where basically it uses From my understanding, it doesn't even do a credit check. It checks like your Apple ID history. I think Goldman is like underwriting it, but Apple's putting up the cash. There's some kind of weird partnership there, similar to what they had with the Apple Card, I believe. And so the point of it is to, I guess, expand opportunity. I know we talked about this a while ago with the Apple Card, Roger. I remember you saying that like they already knew about your birthday or they already knew your social somehow when you applied for it and tried to figure it out. So this seems like an extension of that with maybe a different aspect. I know buy now, pay later could be like its own topic on its own right, but strictly from, I guess, maybe more of a privacy angle, they're basically hoarding a bunch of information about your payment history and stuff with Apple ID transactions and things, and maybe using that to judge your credit worthiness. Is that kind of what's happening?
Yeah, it is. In fact, each of these are independent articles that are coming out, but I think you have to connect the dots. This is one dot, right? And then I think a few weeks back, there was another article that said Apple is building an alternative to credit report or credit score. That's the second dot. Connect these two. And then about last year or 2 years back, somewhere around that, we discussed this. I think maybe last year we discussed it in one of the shows in season 1. We said, can your browsing history be used to impact your credit score? Right? In one of the earlier episodes we discussed. Now, if you remember that, now connect that to each of these, and you realize that Apple is basically trying to use all the information they have at their disposal to build a credit profile of an individual and creditworthiness on this. Now, Apple doing it is one. Whether they'll do a good job or not, we don't know. But what it opens up is a door for everyone to do it. Now, Google is going to be doing it. Everyone will get into the credit card business, and then all your information, all the privacy thing that we looked at, every single details like the house you own and the value of your house and the debts and the size of your paycheck will determine your credit worthiness of some of these services. That's where we are headed, projecting it 3-5 years. But it's sad to see Apple go down this path, not because of anything. I dislike this move from Apple because these are debt-inducing services that will get people into debt, while you should be focusing on getting out of that debt, not just at the individual level, but even at the country level. The last 20 years, we have been spending more than we're making, and that this is one of the service at the individual level. It'll get people into debt. So I dislike the service, but we are discussing about how the privacy and all the information is going to be used to impact that. So it is going down the wrong path of using your private information to determine your score, to provide a service that will get you deeper into debt. So you're going to be debt ridden on money, and you're going to be debt ridden on data, which is another form of money. So it'll get you deep into debt either way.
Wow, we've spiraled already into the but it's almost like this service is, as you say, it's like I don't particularly like the service. I definitely don't like things like payday loans with those loan shark kind of rates. So it's almost like Apple is saying, well, those businesses are here. They've been here forever. People are always going to be in debt. People are always going to need the money. Why don't we just transfer them over and we'll create a service that will allow us to, basically collect data. It almost feels like, and I'm not, saying this is, the reason they're doing it, but it almost feels like in certain instances, companies, big giant companies can get into certain businesses, not for the business itself, but for the data that the business creates and collects. And then they are able to monetize that at some other point. And, companies like Apple and, all the FANG folks, they can almost do this stuff at will, jump into these businesses that have been around forever. They can say, hey, you could trust us better than, the payday loan guys, so just use our service. You're going to be doing it anyway. And then, they allow that to happen, and they create those opportunities for themselves. And it really doesn't change anything net. It just transitions certain kinds of business and data into their hands.
Yeah, I'll play devil's advocate a little bit here. So, typically we've talked about like credit reporting and what happens with like Equifax and all these guys right now. And I would say like the current credit reporting maybe formula is probably a little outdated. And so some would probably argue that, I would be willing to give up, maybe some piece of data in order to establish a credit line for maybe, getting aside from like the debt aspect, but like there's a lot of people who like live on debit cards and rent apartment, and using those two things as your daily drivers, you wouldn't really build a credit report. And so you wouldn't really be able to take advantage of buying things on credit. And so I guess there's like some people would be looking for an alternative or a smarter way to kind of evaluate credit at a broader level and give up some, because in order to evaluate credit, you have to give up some information about yourself. And this just seems like a little bit more sophisticated, possibly. I'm in the boat with Brent and Raju on the buy now, pay later scheme in general, but obviously you buy now, pay later something, and Apple knows exactly what you're buying, who you're buying it from, when you're buying it, every transaction based on that. So there's obviously the data collection angle. But I don't know if you have any thoughts on just kind of the alternative aspect to this kind of credit reporting, more on data.
The current credit reporting, I agree with you in the current credit reporting being outdated and not enough value in that. It is outdated. There's a lot more things happening, and the fact that the credit report and all of those happens a month later. I think I don't know how often it does. I think every month it is impacted and whatnot. And within that month, you can take 5 different loans, go crazy, and still go with that, because the other loan guy doesn't know the current loan that you're working on, all of that. So it has to be real time, and there are some limitations to it, and people game that system anyway. But that said, I think there is certainly merit to it. I'm not too worried about Apple collecting that information. Generally, I respect Apple on the privacy side. I'm worried about the next guy and the third guy and the fourth guy getting into it, and not. Just like I'm less worried about, though I dislike AirTag, I'm less worried about Apple, but I'm more worried about the others who don't consider privacy, but they see it as another door through which they can collect this information. And I think that's where I have a concern with. Very soon, who knows, maybe Facebook will issue what are Bitcoin or what are their current cryptocurrency based cards that you can maybe take a loan on, and maybe buy now pay later, where you can buy your Bitcoin now and pay later. Well, who knows where that
when it's
land.
worthless.
Anyway.
I think
you're
that's
paying for it. It is like completely worthless at that point.
Already happening, Raju. There's a lot of like margin calls and stuff and the crypto stuff going on because people are like over leveraged there, but we won't go too far down that rabbit hole. I guess we could switch gears to, I think, a little bit more on the legal front. A couple different stories happening around the world. So the first is, I thought this article was excellent by this person at Gizmodo, and it basically says our country is moving closer to a federal privacy law, and I moved closer to losing my mind. So we hinted at this a little bit last week, but there's this law that's coming out, or at least just been proposed. It's called the American Data Privacy and Protection Act. It's a bipartisan thing within the Senate, and it goes through a lot of stuff. There are some positives here. It's not like completely negative, but there was 3 big gripes that the author lays out in this article, and I think they were all pretty like not like showstoppers, but like pretty big deals in general. So the first one was how the bill defines data, which seems like it would be a pretty important thing overall of a Data Protection Act. And so it talks about does not stop data collection that already happens, and by the time an app sells your de-identified data to a broker, that it can combine it with more data sources, it'll be too late to stop it. So basically, covered data that they are talking about, what's being protected in the bill, there's 3 things it doesn't include: de-identified data, employee data, and publicly available information. I'd argue that, de-identified data is, we already talked about this, and I feel like it's almost common knowledge now after like even like the John Oliver show did a special on it and articles coming up about it. We kind of just know that de-identified is basically just a small little speed bump in identifying them. Employee data we'll talk about here in a second is another gripe that they have. And then publicly available information, which you don't really have control over, and sometimes you don't really know what's public and what's not, what's considered it. How can you remove your information from the public? That's kind of part of it too. Some of it's from transparency from governments, not all of it. But yeah, let me run through all 3 of these gripes and we can just kind of cycle it from there. And so first one is about, how the bill defines data. The second one was a carve out for cops, which means Brent's favorite company, Clearview, probably had a hand in this 100%. And it basically just has a bunch of exceptions for how law enforcement can ask for data. And if you try to remove your data and law enforcement says, oh, we're like actively looking into this person, the company won't do it. So it kind of just ties these tech companies and data brokers closer in hands with, law enforcement overall. And then the last one is employee surveillance. And so in the employee surveillance, it's talking about how what the definition of an employee basically is, and it talks about director, officer, staff member, whatever. Unpaid temporary workers, janitors, whatever you name it, every other employee, anybody who's associated with the company is considered an employee, and those are all not covered in this thing. And so it just seemed kind of weird that these would be the things that kind of get called out here. Cops, what's the definition of data, and then employees being basically a carve out, which doesn't really make sense. I mean, even law enforcement, I'll give you to an extent, but employee privacy just seems like it would be very basic from a private company perspective, but even that was carved out. So I don't know if you guys had a chance to go through the whole article or just skim through it, but anything else going to stick out to you, or any points you want to kind of add on to what the big gripes from the author were?
It's an excellent article, as you said. I think it's a very good description. First thing I would say, good to see something moving. And there is something in place, because something is better than nothing. Today we have nothing. There are some positives that I saw. One of the things is protecting teenagers, protecting collection of information, people under 17.
Yeah,
and there are some
13 to 17.
13 to 17. So, and in some cases, they are also protecting or keeping users in charge. Where forcing companies to allow users to delete their data, and in some cases, single click to delete the data and all of that. So there are some positives out there. And as with any other law that comes in, are there negatives? Absolutely. The three gripes that they mentioned are good. I'm less worried about the third one. And is it an issue? Yeah, but I'm less worried because if employee does not like the privacy policies of an employer, they get to opt out, they get to walk out, they get to vote with their feet. That is easier to do that. That can be done with number two. You cannot go to a cop and I'm going to walk out, right? So especially they can get to collect your biometric information to whatnot. Third is easier because now employees will want to work for employees who protect their privacy. It's as simple as that. So which is what will keep employers honest. If they want to keep their employees and good employees, then they will want to protect their information. So I'm less worried about number three, but number one and two are important points. Particularly on number two, where there is a carve out. There is a carve out for biometric information. There's a carve out for various other pieces, and therein lies the issue. Now there is more detailed here. By default, the government can get information from private companies. There's no limit to it. That has significant implications, which means if some data is private, is available with a private company, it is accessible throughout, and it has its implications. What happens to all the data that these big tech are collecting from citizens of other countries? Does US has access to it because this is a US law? And will other countries like it? I don't think they will. So they will want to have their own thing, and the virtual walls will come up. That's an important thing. So those are some challenges, but in general, I'm actually glad that something is at least moving. And there are things that we'll have to fix.
All right. And one of those things is, oh, there he is. Tejas is back. Okay. We are just wondering if we lost you forever, but glad to see you're back. I'm going to go just a very broad general statement.
I still am kind of in and out, I think. Y'all sound choppy to me, and I can't really hear.
Well, you actually sound good, but your video doesn't seem to be, it seems to be frozen. But we can now it looks like it's back. So a little choppy, but we're still talking about the article that was a really excellent article on the three or four things that may have this lady who wrote the article pulling her hair out about the upcoming data privacy. I'm going to focus a little bit more on the hair pulling part of it. I think just at a very high level, a broad statement, you don't want too many carve outs when it comes to this stuff, because data seeps out of every little hole that you have, and so you do see some justification for some of these carve outs, and rightfully so. But if you have too many of them, that waters down the privacy, and that becomes a bigger issue because there's just going to be more and more data created as time goes on, as we get more devices, as even more interactions are digital, and that just too many carve outs creates a big cavernous hole that the data will just fly out of faster and faster as time goes on. And Raju, your point about, when you talk about or think about international agreements and a law created in this country without the input of the other countries, how how strict are they going to be in enforcing that? And I think that's a huge issue. I think getting a national data policy is going to be a tough lift in itself. Than trying to connect or create. I think we kind of talked about digital NATO or something like that, or the digital League of Nations. That even comes. I don't know if it's exponentially difficult, more difficult, but it's going to be. And so carve outs, you have to be very careful about how many you.
Yeah, I mean, I don't expect each governments to take permission or consult with other governments per se. When you enforce a law that basically says the government can get information about from the private companies about the users, including their biometric information, that is a law of the it becomes a law of the land. Now, the side implication is what happens when that private company collects that information about non-citizens. So, what will likely happen is other countries will enforce laws saying that any technology company should not store biometric information about their citizens outside their country. That has implications. Will that happen? Absolutely. Try saving information about Europeans and their biometric data in US.
Mm.
That is an open door for various lawsuits and whatnot. Now we are going down that path. Now, because as per the law, the US government has access to it officially. Do they have access to it now unofficially? Yeah, because it's a wild wild west today, and now you make it official. Because it is made official, every other country will also make it official, so that their citizens and their data will not leave their country. Does it have implications? Absolutely. It will have more implications on tech companies than even other companies, because majority of the tech companies are here in US, and it has implications. So long term, actually, I will not be surprised if we go down the path of breaking up some of these companies. It may happen. I mean, just like the good old AT&T was broken into baby bells. And I won't be surprised if, see, the Googles of the world or Microsoft of the world operate independently based on the region, because the privacy implications and their regional aspects and regional laws are different for each of the company. If they want to run it as the same company, and but it is really independent based on the region, I won't be surprised if companies go down this path. I'm not saying it'll happen in the next 2-3 years, but fast forward 10 years, I won't be surprised if we go down that path.
Absolutely. Unfortunately, it looks like we lost our host. Uh, oh, wait a minute. Oh, he is back and looking good.
Yeah, the Wi-Fi got weird, so I'm just on the cell phone hotspot, but it seems to be decent quality. Nobody's cutting out anymore.
That
But
looks good.
what do we have next? You guys wrapped up the new law,
Yeah, we just talked
basically.
about what about that total cookie protection one? That was kind of from Firefox. I don't know what order we're in because we don't have the
You're jumping
slides.
ahead.
But
Oh, I
as
went.
we get there, I just wanted to add one more point to the privacy law that we are talking about, right? We've been talking about privacy and all of that for a long time. The way I see it is, privacy abuse is moving at about 100 miles an hour. Privacy law so far has been 0 miles an hour. Now it's trying to get it to 10 miles an hour.
Hmm.
So the faster they can catch up, the more relevant it is going to be. And today you're basically trying to solve 10-year-old problem. I think we have to, the law has to be changing at the speed of the industry. And technology industries move fast, and law obviously doesn't. Therein lies a conflict that we are seeing, where they are even trying to understand what's going on, and that itself is taking years.
Yeah.
I think that pace of digital nativity, digital laws, and all of these has to change at a faster pace if the laws in the current world have to be relevant.
Yeah. It feels like there's a potential for a privacy arbitrage, because, like you said, there's these laws may be kind of framed for the current state and not looking towards the future. And so, as they get enacted, there's there are new holes that open up, and there'll be data brokers who or whoever that could take advantage of those and kind of make a lot of money because of the it takes so long for government organizations to actually enact anything, and by the time they enact it, it's out of date, sort of.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Speaking of governments enacting stuff, there was another one that came out of Germany, and it's basically investigating the app tracking transparency from iOS into Apple. So there's been a lot of like going back and forth about this app tracking transparency and what it does and all this kind of stuff. And the biggest gripe I would say is that it's not a level playing field. Giving people the prompt and offering them the choice is obviously the best thing that they could do. But there was a tweet thread the other day, or maybe a while ago, and it shows basically the prompt that Apple has whenever they want you to opt into their personalized ads versus when they have other people, and it says this website wants to use information about your browsing history and stuff like that. And so it's clearly like not the same fairness level. So I mean, I totally understand and almost agree with this kind of like non-level playing field happening here, because Apple itself uses information across multiple apps that they make in order to serve up their own ad system. I think Roger said it like a dozen times on the show before, but for everything good Apple is doing, it seems to still be going down this ads model, which is just shooting itself in the foot. If they rent pure privacy, no ads, you're not really losing that much money in the grand scheme of things for Apple. And it would just save face from a lot of this kind of shadiness you have to do. So I just don't really understand why they even continue to make these kinds of mistake, unless they think the ads market is going to be bigger for them in the future. But yeah, I think this is probably the most valid criticism is just not a fair playing field for everybody, given how Apple uses that data. What do you guys think? Similar?
No, it's very very similar. Yeah, it's very fair that whatever rules Apple imposes, it should impose it to its apps as well. That's the first step. And the reason that criticism even comes up because Apple has an ad-based business model or unit that probably doesn't make much money comparatively speaking, but the negative thing, press and impact that it creates is much worse than any money that Apple makes. And yeah, I mean, there is the other side to it where I think, yeah, somebody is attacking Apple is a set of companies that are impacted by ATT. That's where it's coming from, because you won't see this against Google, well, because Google doesn't even do it, I guess. So imagine Google wanting to do it at that level. The reason that entire platform exists is to track you. It feels like so there's a different standard here we're certainly applying, but if Apple is serious about privacy, it should apply those rules to their apps as well. I totally agree.
I think this is a big deal, and it's one that Apple can nip in the bud quickly because all the things you guys just said. It's I don't the do as I say, not as I do. Or don't you need to follow these rules? Don't worry about us. We're the ones putting the rules. That gives people the power to come at Apple, and rightfully so, because if you're setting up the rules, shouldn't you have to live by the rules? Just because you're setting these rules up doesn't mean you're exempt from them, or it shouldn't be. But apparently, when you make the rules, you do think that you're above the rules, and they don't have to be. Like they just said, they don't make any money, comparatively speaking, off of off of ads compared to selling stuff. I mean, they're the biggest company in the world from selling stuff. You don't need to, be the biggest company in the digital ad space either. And I think you really lose some luster when you especially maybe some trust with Apple customers when you do things like that. And you don't have to do that. You don't have to have the last crumb of the 100 cookies. You can share a couple of cookies. You can leave a couple of cookies out there for the rest of the world. you know you'll still be well fed. So Apple, please leave us some crumbs, some cookies, a couple at least. You don't have to take it all.
Well, they're not going to listen to you, Brett. I don't know what to tell you. But we had two more things to run through real quick, though. This one was similar to the Gizmodo article about a privacy legislation. This one I thought was a lot more seemed a lot more targeted. Like it could have been a lot more holistic on the principle of location data, or you could just co-sign on whatever previous one and that was introduced and run on this whole privacy thing. But it just seemed extremely narrow on only banning location data around and health data sales. But it's almost explicitly through the article, and the original motherboard thing is it's all coming from the leaked Supreme Court announcement, and it just seems overly partisan in that opinion. Privacy is not a bipartisan, everybody should be on board about this, and it's not really meant to be that way. But the way this one was framed, I just wasn't really a big fan of it. I thought it could have been tied in with more things rather than just being so narrowly slivered. But did you guys think anything different? I mean, in general, like Raju always says, it's good that something is happening here. But I just think Elizabeth Warren has probably a decent amount of pull, and her signing on with another bigger one and co-sponsoring a bigger privacy data sale prevention act or whatever would probably have a bigger impact than this little isolated one. But what do you guys think?
I didn't look at the details in there, but again, the devil is going to be in the details. Is it written by someone that is privacy conscious, that is doesn't have any partisan leaning, or is it written by someone who basically is burnt by the recent thing and then they want to force a legislation? We don't know. I think you have to dig it. I didn't get a chance to dig into this in detail, but certainly something is moving. But I think we just need to look at the ripple and say, when this drops, what is the ripple effect? And if the ripple is too big, then it could have a negative impact. I think the other privacy thing that we are looking at should more broadly be covering some of these things, like the location and all of that data.
I think in some ways, Health and Location Protection Act, it feels like they're trying to treat health data and location data in a similar way, and they're not really similar data. And this may be an issue, just a general issue about trying to come up with real privacy legislation that has real protection in it. I don't think you can treat location data the same as health data. There are different implications for the two of them. And
yeah, I think the reason they got kind of piggybacked on top of each other is because remember a couple of weeks ago we talked about how a couple services were offering location data around abortion clinics and stuff like that.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
It's
I think that's why
take those two threads. Maybe she was listening to the show, who knows, and saw that if you tie these two threads together, we can make a bill about it. But yeah, go ahead. Sorry to cut you off.
I think the best way to do, probably, at least just thinking out loud here, the one way to do it is, each one is a subset of information. Let's take location is a subset, healthcare is a subset, financial data is a subset, your personal information is a subset, and on. I keep going, right? Now, when a data provider, or at least a service provider, tries to accumulate a piece of data, give it a point. Let's say 10 points for one piece of data, maybe another 10 points for the other piece of data. Every accumulation of every subset has to become tougher. Or at least there has to be some element in there. And because we discussed about anonymizing and de-anonymizing data, because that has become tougher Now, if you try to bring these two together and try to make sense of it, and then what are you doing with that? The law has to get stricter the more you accumulate. And today that means the data brokers will be and the law on them should be significantly stricter than anyone just collecting one piece of information for one purpose there. Think like obviously your GPS is going to collect all your location information. It is only one piece of data, but if you're combining that with the healthcare data here, then it has to be significantly stricter. So the more pieces of these subsets that you accumulate, the exponentially complex it has to get, and the more permissions you may have to take from the end user whose information you're using. I think it has to be something like that. Otherwise, now it is like the data brokers currently rule.
Yeah, I totally agree on that. There is we talk about this every week. Kind of lamenting why they haven't done it. There's a lot to think about here. There's a lot to really put together in a way that makes sense. And I'm in total agreement. Let's try to get something. Let's get something that makes sense. It may not solve or get 100% of what we need, but if we can at least get something that makes sense, that will be a net positive and not something that will lament later. I think that's a really good first step, and being able to see how it works and tweak and fix where needed. Trying to maybe do too much with health and locate, that's a lot. That's a big lift. I don't know where we start, but it may be a little easier to start with something that isn't as complex as health and location together, because I can see a lot of uh, unintended circumstances come up from some of this stuff.
I would like to see some legislation sprints.
Sprints, like 100 yard.
No, I think like in products, as you develop products, and the startups follow these sprints where every week they have a stand-up meeting, and they have to make progress, say, on a weekly basis,
Yeah.
and there is a clear goals defined and whatnot. It'll be good to apply the same concept to legislation. It's going to be an interesting thing to watch. I would watch a sprint on C-SPAN.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean, it'll be a little bit more interesting, but I don't know if you can get these guys to buy in. But last thing we'll cover was this article from Firefox's blog. Rolls out total cookie protection by default to all users worldwide. And it's a good thing to end on. I think it's a pretty good note in general. But basically, we've talked a lot about third-party cookies. One website you visit could have cookies to other websites, and that's how people like Facebook and Google track you around everywhere you go. And what Firefox is doing is I don't think I have a graph. Oh, I do have a graphic. It's a pretty good illustration. And it basically shows very clearly what's happening. Like every website you visit drops cookies in this centralized browser cookie jar, if you will. And what they're doing now is each website you visit will have its own isolated place for storing cookies that won't be able to access others. So it kind of just sandboxes every website. I think Firefox had this Facebook mode or Facebook container that they were using before, and so I think they just kind of expanded that to other to every website. But overall, I think this is a great advancement and probably a good reason to use Firefox in general, because this was nice that everyone's got it. What do you guys think?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a good progress from Firefox and whatnot. It's a pretty good thing. Cookies are one thing. If you can extend that to your tracking or embed codes and whatnot, some kind of a restriction, that would be a good progress. I'm sure they're thinking about it, but good to see progress, and the more such things we see. And I would like to see a lot of these browsers competing on privacy. That's when progress gets made.
Yeah.
This is a good progress, and I'm sure others will now try to get there. But yeah, I'm happy with the progress with some of the things that they're doing.
I'm so glad that we're actually ending on that note, because it is a good thing. This is one that you don't even have to think about, oh, what are the negative implications from private? There really aren't. I mean, some of the other things we talk about all the time, there's always, well, it does this, but what about that? This is actually good. Now, advertisers may see this as something, a little bit different, but net, I think this is good. And I just wanted to kind of throw something at you guys. Uh, I believe this is we're about a full year into this, because we started in June of last year. I don't know exactly what day, but I'm thinking we're if we're not at a year, we're very close to it. So why don't if you would share your thoughts a year into what is this last year? What have you seen this last year in terms of has privacy, become something more central to the conversations or discussions you're seeing? Do you feel like there's a difference a year in from where we started at the beginning?
I certainly see that. I've seen a lot of discussion happening over privacy, and it's become mainstream news, and you see those shows and articles on dedicated on privacy. Earlier, we used to, it is kind of on the periphery, but now it's become mainstream and it's become frequent. That's a good thing. That is more broadly in general, and I've seen many people, even who the ones who watched our show, come to me and said, "Hey, I'm glad you guys are doing it, and I didn't know this was happening. I didn't know the other thing was happening." So they were thankful about the information they are getting. That is a positive thing. And for me personally, by doing the show, I've learned a lot. The best way to learn is to teach, or something like that. So where if you keep talking about it, and you educate yourself, and when you start to talk about it, and that's where you internalize and you think this through, and whatnot. So I've learned a lot just doing the show, and discussing this openly and having that conversation. So I see it as a very positive thing, both for me personally, and I've heard from others who basically saw this as a very positive educational thing which we are trying to do.
Yeah, I mean, the only downside is you can't walk down the street because people recognize us so much from this show. So that's a little bit of a downside. But and we probably have targets on our back from like every surveillance company out there. But like Raji said, I mean, yeah, I've had a few people tell me that like they enjoy the show, they like seeing the different perspectives everybody has, and that's really the big thing. Is I mean, reading here and there, and like we were all kind of following this to some extent, but I think just now like our eyes are open to a lot more. You pay attention to it, you ask yourself questions whenever you see a service, and you're just a little bit more analytical. And it's kind of a snowball effect. I think once you get like, we're still in the early stages and the ball is kind of getting a little bit bigger slowly, but once the masses kind of pick on and becomes a little bit more mainstream, then it will be like we made a difference, I would say. And at the end of the day, even if a few people end up changing their perception of how these things work, I call that a success in itself. I mean, it's not really anything more than that. It's just really opening eyes, kind of getting people red pilled or whatever.
I totally agree. I feel, personally, I feel like I've learned a ton over this last year. And sometimes, as we do these shows, it feels like there's a more negative spin, but I think the overarching is the knowledge gained and the better understanding of, the current state, but it also kind of gets you to thinking about, well, what should privacy really look like? What are some of the ways that it'll have the most positive impact on consumers and just regular people? So I learned a lot. Of course, I never heard of Clearview before this past year, and I won't say that's part of the positive spin of it, but you're learning the players, you're learning some of the tactics, you're learning how, the way that they're trying to evolve the technology and who and why. And I think all of that is good. And it's a net positive. And I think, it'll be interesting to see what we are talking about a year from now, because it seems like, we went from 0 to 100 in this year, and the potential is to go from 100 to like 1,000 in this next year. I think this grows exponentially. What's
Right.
happening, and it speeds up. So I think this next year it's going to make the last year look like, really, what, that you guys are thinking about that, really, so it'll be interesting to see what happens
Good
Yeah.
progress. And next episode, I'm getting my cap on with Warriors Championship.
I will bring
tonight.
my Celtics hat with the Celtics championship. So
Wait a minute,
don't worry.
Raju. So tonight is a big one. Do you think we're gonna take it home tonight?
Yeah,
Who's a
it'll be
we?
done.
How are you a we now, Brent?
It'll
Come
be
on.
I
done.
have been a Golden State Warriors fan since 2009, and this is serious, Tages. I'm not a bandwagon because they were not good back then. I'm a huge Georgetown college basketball fan. So in 2008, when my Georgetown Hoyas were like ranked number 2 in the going into the Final Four, they ran into this little skinny kid and from his college called Davidson, and I was like, oh, we're gonna kill these dudes. Are you kidding me? And he put on the best show I've ever seen in a college basketball game. So I've been a fan ever since.
So you were a fan of the guy who destroyed the team that you liked?
It took a while to get over, but he was so much fun to watch. And then the next week he did the same thing. So yeah.
Right.
So
either way, next week we'll all bring our hats and we'll see who's got the best one. All right. Well, we'll call it a day there. Long show, a lot to cover, but always good talking to you guys, and see you guys next week. Bye.